Okay, well, hello and welcome everyone to those of you in the live audience and those of you on Zoom. This is the UC Center Sacramento Speaker Series. I'm Richard Kravitz, Director at UCCS, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here today to our second Speaker Series event of this quarter and the 9th of this academic year. As most of you know, UC Center Sacramento is a system-wide education and policy dissemination program of the entire University of California. Part of our purpose is to fulfill the university's public service mission by sharing knowledge and insights to support public policymaking around critical problems in California, of which there are many. And one especially critical problem, of course, is homelessness. This quarter, we're offering a 5-part series in the hopes of stimulating creative solutions to this problem. 2 weeks ago, we heard from Elizabeth Twomley from UC San Diego. She spoke on some of the neurocognitive problems that affect individuals with chronic homelessness. And in subsequent weeks, we'll be hearing from Enrico Castillo, who will talk about solutions that have cropped up elsewhere in the United States, from Joel Braslow on the history of mental health care and homelessness in California, and finally a panel that includes State Senator John Laird and California Mental Health Commission Director Toby Ewing on solutions that are specific to California. But today our focus is on the revolving door of that many chronically homeless individuals experience as they move between the healthcare system and the streets and back again. And we're joined by 2 distinguished panelists who will speak in turn, followed by questions from you, our audience. And to introduce our panelists, I'm pleased to call on Tom McMorrow, Chair of the UCCS Advisory Board, partner at Mannett, Phelps & Phillips, UCLA alum, and a major driving force between everything that goes on with the center, including the new building, which you may say something about that we'll be looking into later this year. Tom?
Thank you, Rich. Thank you all for coming today. It's great to see a full room, and I guess I should have worn a mask. I apologize not putting one on. I will get to the new building in a minute, but the reason I invoked the privilege of being the chair of the advisory board and asking to introduce the speakers today is because of both the topic that Dr. Melin and Mayor Steinberg will be addressing, but also because my friend Darrell Steinberg and I have led a parallel life in politics in a different space, and I could not know that he was coming to the center and not come introduce him myself. So now we'll go back to the agenda. Tom McMorrow, I chair the the UC Center's Advisory Board. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Amy Melin, whose career spans the world of academia and practical medicine. She's medicine day-to-day, but also ventured into the policy area. And of course, Darrell, who represents policy, governance itself, and politics. People focus on the politics, we focus on the policy and the governance here. Dr. Melin is a professor of emergency medicine and psychiatry and director of the emergency behavioral health program at the UC Davis Medical Center. She's board certified in both emergency medicine and addiction medicine. She focuses her work at the intersection of mental illness, substance use, and acute care. She has published widely in areas ranging from Medicaid policy to management of cannabis intoxication. In that regard, she has been called on to speak at least once in media sources, inside joke. Dr. Melin is co-founder of the California Bridge Project, which is an effort to rapidly expand access to evidence-based treatment for substance use disorder. And she completed her undergraduate education at UC Davis. She went on to USC for medical school and did her residency at both Harbor, UCLA, and at USC. In addition to her academic her efforts, she is also former president of the California chapter of the American College of Emergency Physicians. So with that, we welcome you, Dr. Melin. This one's a lot easier for me. Mayor Darrell Steinberg is also here with us today. He is currently the mayor. He's the former president pro tem of the state senate. Before that, state assembly member, all from Sacramento, so he's very well known to this group. He's a favorite son. We're glad he's here. He was reelected in 2020 after being elected mayor in 2016. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but rumor has it that he might be moving from executive after being in the legislative to perhaps the judicial branch. We'll see. Rumor. And he co-chairs Governor Newsom's Regional Council of Homeless Advisors and has been a leading voice, not just here, but nationally, because he has President Biden's ear. So I welcome you, Darrell Steinberg. Thank you. I also want to thank Senator Roger Nilo, another board member for the UC Center, for joining us today, newly back in the legislative setting, for joining us. Thanks, Roger. And just to talk about, briefly, if you look around, you're going to be in 3 months, you're going to be in a different venue. And it'll be a much bigger hall, it'll be above ground. There'll be other gathering spaces for students, there'll be technological capacity. It's very exciting. It's taken a decade to get this together. It will open in 2023, and we couldn't be more excited about it, and I just couldn't help but give a plug to that. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Really excited to be here. It's always hard to go in front of Darrell, so please bear with me.
He's the expert.
I'm Amy Moulin. I am an ER doctor, so you should know that because the way that I see the world is different. It's through the vantage point of the emergency departments. I am also an addiction medicine specialist, primarily because when I look out in the world of people in my emergency departments, the greatest unmet need that I see is in addiction treatment. The greatest driver of healthcare utilization and ER visits is in addiction, lack of addiction treatment, a lack of access. So that's really where I have focused my life, and that's something that we're going to talk a little bit about today. So this is a picture of my emergency department. You can kind of see this is pre-COVID, all these naked faces in the ER, which we'll probably never see again. But this is our trauma bay, and here you can kind of see we're doing what we do best in the emergency department, which is rapid stabilization, team-based care, highly coordinated, and this is actually what I think we need to bring to addiction treatment, mental illness, and unstable housing. It's the same type of complex problem that requires that highly coordinated, team-based approach. I don't have any financial disclosures, but remember, as we talk about this, my view of the world is very different. It's from the lens of the emergency department, and the population that I see every day is different. Okay, I wanted to start here, and actually I would love to, if you have questions, please raise your hand. I'm happy to chat with them. But what do you see in this picture? Does anyone see in this picture? I put this up, I asked my husband, who's a lovely individual, and he said, Amy, I see garbage, which I think is true of a lot of people. Anybody? Yes? A crib. You see a crib. Does anybody see neighbors? Yeah?
I see a home.
You see a home. Does anyone see neighbors? Right? I see this is where people live and have their life, and actually, all respect to my darling husband, it's actually quite clean. I don't see garbage. I see a very well-maintained place. And I wanted to bring up this because what I'm going to talk about today is a very specific part of people who are experiencing homelessness. And those are the people who are accessing the emergency department. People who are high utilizers of the emergency department who have very specific healthcare and medical needs. And that's not necessarily representative of the entire population of people who are experiencing homelessness. So when I talk about the population, and what we're focusing on today is the group of people with unmet healthcare and medical needs. And the other thing I want to talk about is when we talk about homelessness, that is the problem that we see. Those of us in this room drive by and we see a problem of homelessness. I see a problem of people living on the street in places where I don't want them to be living. And that is a problem for me. And how I define that problem, the problem of homelessness, is not necessarily how the people who are experiencing homelessness would define their primary needs. There's actually a survey done in Spain where they surveyed people who are experiencing homelessness and asked them a really simple question. Are you happy? Do you feel satisfied with your life? 64% of the people said yes. Now, I don't know, maybe people in Spain are just inherently happier than we are here, but really I bring this up to say that homelessness, and if we attack the problem of homelessness, that is my problem. That is how I see the problem. But perhaps if I brush the problem of people living outside in places I don't want them to live, I'm missing what is really the underlying driver and what are the individual needs of those people. And if we want to help people to recover, to find alternate places to house, we need to think about what are the needs of those individuals. So this is the reason I wanted to bring this up to this picture, is to think about homelessness is my problem. It's not necessarily the problem that the people see or really the needs that they would say they most need. So here's what we're going to focus on today. We're really going to focus on, and what I'm going to talk about are the population of people with unmet healthcare and social needs. Really that complex interaction of mental illness, substance use, and unstable housing, and how those three really interplay and interact with each other to make it really hard for people to find a way out. Because you think about people who have mental illness, substance use, those two things make it really difficult for people to access that complicated system and to make it out of those and to access our social safety net. And we're going to talk a little bit about, particularly from my vantage point, how our system is really honestly, almost specifically designed to fail the people who are most need. And to begin to think about what are the problems, what are the gaps, and how we can make the system work for the people who need to access it. Because kind of like how we describe the problem of homelessness, we have designed a system that works for me, that works for healthcare providers, that maybe works for payers and how we think about it, but really doesn't work for the person who's trying to access care. And again, I'm not talking about everybody, but really that specific population that is accessing care through the emergency department. Okay, so this is the population that I'm going to talk about here, which is specifically my emergency department population. So this is the demographics of people who self-identify as unhoused in the emergency department. And to look at kind of like what is the race ethnicity of people in the emergency department at UC Davis in Sacramento who have self-identified as unhoused. I'm going to pause here. Any questions? Does this bring up anything for anybody? Does this match the demographics of Sacramento? No, it does not. So inherently, you can start to see there are some structural disadvantages in our community where certain groups of people are more likely to be homeless and access care in the emergency department. Any other questions or thoughts here? Yeah.
What are the percentages?
So the question here is, what are the percentages? And you know, I didn't write it down, but yeah, no, you were totally right. I should have written down the percentages.
Reflective. I don't know the whole number. I don't know the percentage.
Correct. So the question here was on the slides. I do not have the percentages on there, but I can get them for you. Generally, you...
The African-American population, I think, is 8 or 9% of the...
Correct.
Yeah.
African-American population is about 8 to 10% of Sacramento population, but is disproportionately represented in the homeless population that is accessing care through emergency departments. So it was really an excellent question. Same thing's going to see here with gender identity. You can see primarily people are self-identifying as male. We had only 3 people identify as non-binary, and I'm going to guess, that is inaccurate, and that has to do with how people are self-identifying in the hospital, but is not necessarily reflective of the whole population. The other one we have is sort of the age distribution, and you can kind of see there's a skewing towards middle adulthood, where primarily people from the age of 25 to 65. What I find remarkable is that there were 6 people seen in the UC Davis Emergency Department in the last year experiencing homelessness who were over the age of 85, which I feel like is a really terrible failure of our social safety net system, that there were that number is anything above 0. And here's where I want to spend a little bit of time. And this is just a distribution of what people say when they're coming to the emergency department of why they're accessing healthcare. The primary reason that we put is suicidal or psychosis is the #1 chief complaint of people accessing emergency departments who are experiencing homelessness. But it's not everybody, right? So there's kind of a myth that everybody who's coming to the emergency department who's experiencing homelessness is there for mental health care needs. That is not true. #2 is actually trauma. So #2 would be critical trauma patients. And when I say critical trauma patients, we're a trauma center. So these are people who are not there because I twisted my knee, I stubbed my toe. This is someone who was experienced like blunt trauma, a car accident, an assault. But this is the #1. The #2 is actually trauma patients. And then you have shortness of breath, abdominal pain, chest pain, which are reasons why the general population also accesses emergency care. So I want to bring this up because I think it's important to recognize people who are experiencing homelessness also access emergency care for the same reasons that everybody else accesses emergency care, which is chest pain, shortness of breath, abdominal pain. And to recognize that people have general medical needs as well. And there's actually a small percentage of people who are actually there for medication refills or other social needs. And so I think there's also a little bit of a myth that people come to the emergency department only to get medication refills, and that does not necessarily bear out in our data. Questions here? Yeah. Yeah, so these are broad categories and how people are categorized when they walk into the emergency department. And this is usually someone who is there requesting housing needs, someone who is there requesting help with food, transportation, and that we categorize them in the emergency department as social needs. Now, a good percentage of those, we walk into the room and do a more thorough investigation and realize there are other things that that person needs, but these are just sort of broadly how we categorize people. And I bring this up not to say that this is a scientific end-all be-all, but really to emphasize the diversity of needs and reasons that people access emergency care. But great question. I got another one here. I don't have, I have some percentages up there for you, though. Yeah. No, it doesn't add up to 100% because there were a lot of other in there that didn't kind of come out.
Well, my calculation said it added up to 42% of the whole 100%.
I'm sorry. So these are the top 10.
Yeah. So it's 42% of the whole, it looks like.
Correct.
So the other 58%?
Have other complaints, yes. Right? So again, this is another piece. A broad range of reasons why people come to the emergency department. #1 being suicidal and psychosis, but that is not the majority. So that is an excellent point there.
Only 10%. I mean,
Correct, yeah.
decided 1 out of 10, so.
Now, if I go back a step and talk about, this is a study from Michigan that looks at healthcare utilization and what people have as a chronic illness. So this is not the chief complaint, not necessarily why they came to the emergency department, but their comorbid conditions. So these are the conditions that people bring with them who are experiencing homelessness, who are in the emergency department. And number one is substance use. So of the people who are utilizing the emergency department, almost half have a co-occurring substance use disorder as part of their comorbidity. 38% had depression, 36 said alcohol use, and your question of like, isn't alcohol use a substance use disorder? Here they separated out other substances, heroin, methamphetamine use versus alcohol use, so kind of more of the artificial separation that we do where we consider alcohol different from heroin because it's legal. And you could also ask me about tobacco use, which is not on here. 29% psychosis and 28% hypertension. So of the people in the emergency department, there are high rates of comorbid substance use and mental illness, depression, alcohol, and psychosis, even if that was not necessarily the driver for the ED visit. Those are some of the co-occurring conditions that I think make it more complicated for those individuals to access care elsewhere or to really navigate through the social safety net that we have in place. And I think this is really important here, which is everybody has been in the news media around the impact of overdose and to recognize how overdose also disproportionately impacts the population of people experiencing homelessness. Particularly with high rates of substance use, overdose has been shown to be one of the leading causes of death of people experiencing homelessness, and this is looking at the risk of opioid overdose, looking at low-income housed individuals versus unhoused individuals, and you'll see higher risk of overdose, either fatal or non-fatal overdoses in people who are unhoused. So really these combine to me, and remember I'm also focused on addiction, to see that this is a huge driver, substance use, of morbidity and mortality for people who are unhoused. Questions here? No, huh? Okay. So now we're going to narrow in on multi-visit patients because we wanted to talk about the revolving door. So these are the people who are coming back to the emergency department who are unhoused. And what you see here is we pulled out people who had more than 4 visits in the past 3 months. This is a lot of ED utilization. So more than once a month, someone is going to the emergency department who is unhoused. So now we've narrowed in from that general population of people who are experiencing homelessness to those who came to the ER once, to those group of people who are repeatedly accessing care through the emergency department. So this is the group of people who are, we could say, has unmet needs. This is the group of people who are coming back to the emergency department because I haven't yet figured out how to fix their problem, right? I'm always in awe of people who continue to come back. I didn't fix the problem the first time, but they still believe that we can, and so they come back again. So we have to have extra respect for this group of population. Of the people overall in the emergency department who have more than 4 visits in 3 months, 10% are unhoused. 10% of the unhoused patients have more than 4 visits versus only 1% of the housed patients. So people who are experiencing homelessness are more likely in and of itself to have multiple visits to the emergency department independently. Now if I take the people who are unhoused and have mental illness, 19% of those people are more likely to have multiple visits to the emergency department. If I take the unhoused population with substance use, 39% are more likely to have 4 or more visits in the previous 3 months. Is anyone here noticing a theme? Doesn't take rocket science. Yeah, I got a question.
So are these great numbers, or is there an overlap between the 19% of mental
there is an overlap. There is an absolute overlap. And this is a really good point to bring up is a lot of times in healthcare, it is difficult for us to tease out what is a substance use versus what is psychosis versus what is both. What started out as substance use and is now mental illness. What is PTSD from living on the streets versus substance use. So this is not exclusive of one another. And it is a really excellent point. And I think one of the things that I'm really hoping you take away from this is all of this overlaps and layers. And when we try to separate, particularly when we offer healthcare, it doesn't work. Another question.
Actually, if we take questions, it'd be great if you could repeat them.
Oh, sorry.
Usually at the end, we have a microphone, but folks that are on Zoom can't hear any of the questions that have been asked.
Correct. So that question was, when I separate out mental illness and substance use, are they mutually exclusive? And the answer was no. In that in this numbers, some of the people with substance use also have mental illness, and some of the people with mental illness also have substance use.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm not sure if this is something you have on hand, but do you know the average length of stay in the emergency room for the unhoused population, especially folks who are coming back multiple times in a 3-month period?
So the question around the average length of stay for the unhoused population, I do not know the number off the top of my head. However, I can tell you the average length of stay for people experiencing homelessness is longer than that. For people who are discharged from the emergency department, I should clarify. So if someone is seen in the emergency department and discharged and unhoused, their length of stay in the emergency department is significantly longer than people who are stably housed and discharged from the emergency department. For people who end up being admitted to the hospital, their emergency department length of stay is relatively the same.
Amy, in the interest of time, maybe.
Okay, I will keep going. I apologize. Okay, so this is just a breakdown of substances used. There is some overlap here as well, because there's a lot of polysubstance use. Why I wanted to bring this up is there's a high proportion of stimulant use, primarily methamphetamines, in my unhoused population. And I want to tell you a little bit of a story about why it's so high. When I talk to people who are unhoused who use methamphetamines, here's a common story, is it is really hard if you are on the streets and you need to stay up all night because you don't have a place to sleep. And methamphetamines are a wonderful stimulant that helps you to stay up all night, every night, so that you can be safe. If you do not have a safe place to shelter overnight, it's really difficult to sleep. And so a lot of people will compensate and use methamphetamine as a stimulant the same way that I use my cappuccino, which is to stay awake. So that really resonates with me as, to really kind of think about and empathize with what people are dealing with when they're unhoused. When you do not have shelter at night, it's really hard to sleep. And so a lot of people will take stimulants in order to stay awake because they don't feel safe sleeping at night. And so this is one of the reasons we do see a predominance of methamphetamine use in our unhoused population, also because meth is endemic to Sacramento. And then in terms of healthcare, this is one of the things that we talk about a lot, is how is your discharge plan going to work? And does my discharge plan work when someone is unhoused? How do you refrigerate your medications? How do you access other healthcare services? And will my discharge plan work here? When I send someone with a wound out and I say, okay, you need to keep your wound clean and dry and do dressing changes 3 times a week, how do you do that if you don't have running water? And so all of these complications make it really challenging for people to comply with what I need them to do at home. And so it just adds on to those complexities. And this is to talk a little bit about our system, and one of the things that we struggle a lot with, particularly when accessing substance use treatment and mental illness. Long waits. It is really hard if I send someone out and say, hey, they're going to call you in 6 months for an appointment, when you don't know where you're going to be in 6 months. transportation barriers, insurance authorization, and then I will take ownership of this from the healthcare setting, restrictive paternalistic treatment models. When I say you have to show up at this time having done these 5 things, or you do not get whatever treatments that you need. That turns people off and makes it really difficult to access care. Disjointed, siloed systems of care. The system for mental illness, for mental health care, is funded completely separately from the system that provides substance use treatment. That is completely different from the system that provides treatment for high blood pressure and hepatitis C and HIV. And so we have these completely separated systems with completely separated funding streams, because that works for us. But if you are the person who is struggling to get up in the morning or to stay awake at night, it is really impossible to navigate these 3 separate, siloed, disjointed systems in order to meet your healthcare needs. And then really, let's just talk about logistics. This is the time when people arrive in the emergency department. So the time period when people are most need to access care for themselves. 67% arrive after hours and 28% on weekends. If I can only get you an appointment Monday through Friday, 9 to 3 p.m., and you don't have a phone, or you do have a phone, you don't have a way to charge your phone, how do I call you and tell you when your appointment is on Monday when you showed up at 9 p.m. on Wednesday? So it's just some of the logistics of providing that care for people that make it really challenging to get them the follow-up care that they need. And I'm going to go through this really quickly because I think we're at time, yeah? Okay. So this is really what we focused on, which is substance use treatment and trying to provide substance use treatment through the emergency department and getting people the care that they need. And so we have really focused on this concept of no wrong door, low barrier access to treatments where you walk in the door at the emergency department and can access drug treatment right then, because this is the only way that I see we're going to be able to help people get the care that they need. And then I just wanted to put a plug in for this, which is we often think of substance use disorder as untreatable, and people with substance use disorder are doomed, when the outcomes for substance use treatment mirror diabetes, hypertension, and asthma, where the relapse and recurrence rates are roughly the same. And so as we start to change the way that we think about this as a chronic illness, we see that the rates of recovery are roughly the same. And this is the last thing that I really want to leave you with, and that is the myth of treatment resistance. And that when we offered treatment, drug treatment, to people experiencing homelessness who were still experiencing homelessness, and we started them on drug treatment and connected them to outpatient treatment, 67% of those people showed up in their outpatient treatment program. So really just to leave you with this myth that people who are unhoused don't want treatment or are unwilling to access it, because they do when we make it work for them. I'm really just going to leave you with that, turn it over to my wonderful colleague, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Amy. That was powerful and compelling. And what credibility in the fact that you live this every day and you see what is so broken. I want to thank the UC Center. Thank you for inviting me. Richard, Tom, thank you. Cindy, thank you to everyone who makes this great program work, and to all the young people, the students. I'd say do not give up hope. We're counting on you to fix what is broken. I want to begin by sharing with you a little bit about the present context, and then talking about history, and then describing what I think some of the paths forward might be. And this is from a public policy lens. I am, just like Senator Nilo, a politician. An honor, and You're a car dealer. Thank you. And I'm an attorney. This is a great guy and really a real public servant. We served together for many, many years from different sides of the aisle, and I'm glad you're back. You're a good man. Yeah. So I'm the mayor of Sacramento. I was president pro tem of the Senate during the worst recession in modern history, and I thought I would never experience a tougher chapter of public service. And then I decided to run for mayor. And it's been every bit as tough and tougher, even though the stakes, the size of the scale is smaller than the responsibilities I had as a state leader. But here's a fact that many people don't know and would surprise you. Since 2017, Sacramento steps forward our continuum of care around homelessness reports publicly that between the city and county, we have gotten over 17,000 people from unsheltered status to housed and stable. 17,000. In the city of Sacramento, the city is not a homeless service provider. We don't do mental health. We don't do substance abuse. When I started as mayor, we had less than 100 nightly beds for people for temporary, medium-term, and even long-term shelter. We are now up to 1,100 beds a night. Now, I articulate those two statistics, and, I guess I should be planning a major parade in downtown Sacramento to celebrate. But of course, I'm not going to do that because there's little to celebrate except for the people that have been helped as a result. Because the problem itself has become undeniably worse. And even though I make no excuses, I don't have all of the tools as the mayor of this city, I have the responsibility, and I have certainly the passion and the drive to continue to try to make this better. That's the present context. Let me tell you a little bit of history. In 1967, the state of California passed the famous Lanterman-Petrus Short Act, which was the state's version of a national drive started by actually President John F. Kennedy to shut institutions, mental hospitals, and release people with severe mental illness into the community, but with the wraparound kinds of supports that people with brain-based illnesses need to be able to succeed in the community. 1967. 10 years later, the same Frank Lanterman, I believe he was a Republican, by the way, led an effort to begin shutting the state developmental centers, DDS. Now, the politically incorrect term from past generations was people with mental retardation. Now it's developmental disabilities, people who have intellectual disabilities. They passed a similar act in 1977, but when they passed that act and began shutting the state developmental centers, they granted a legal entitlement to lifetime service for people with developmental disabilities. Very important. 10 years earlier, when Lanterman-Petrus, in short, passed the act shutting the state mental hospitals, they created no legal entitlement for people living with mental illness in our community to get the support and the care that they need. And I would submit to you that many, many decades later, that distinction and difference, by the way, based on discrimination and stigma, because those with intellectual or developmental disabilities, quote, did not cause their disability. Those who live with mental illness, in fact, we call it behavioral health to encompass mental health and substance abuse, are somehow and for some reason still in our minds, maybe in the deeper recesses of our mind, at fault in some way for the way that we are living, for the way, that they are living. So let's go back to 2023. We live in a world of dualities, of either or, certainly in the public policy context and in the political context. And let's describe some of those dualities when it comes to homelessness and mental illness. Either you believe that it's a problem of more money, or you believe that it is a systems failure. Either you believe it is a housing crisis, or you believe it is a mental health and substance abuse crisis. Either you are for strengthening the conservatorship laws, or you believe that people have a civil right to choose how to live. Either you are an activist, mostly from the left, or you're a frustrated citizen or business owner who's fed up with the condition on our streets. And I want to take my few minutes here to sort of explore these dualities and as I do, hopefully describe some paths towards our doing better as a city, as a state, and as a country. Either you believe this is all about money or it's about systems failure. I believe very strongly that the reason why the systems, from the public system to the private health insurance companies to the cities and the counties, can get away with not having consistent encampment outreach teams with clinically trained mental health workers, peer support, and housing specialists out on the streets of Sacramento every single day of the week is because there's no legal requirement to do so. Now, good news, at the end of 2022, after 6 years of struggle, the city and county are different animals. 75% of the homeless problem exists within the city, 3/5 of the county, and Senator Nilo used to be on the County Board of Supervisors, 3/5 of the county is largely outside of the city. Different cultures, different histories, and different political power and representation in the statistic that I just described. It took me 6 years. And by the way, I'm not very popular over in the county of Sacramento, although things have improved. We finally negotiated a first of its kind legally binding partnership agreement that requires the city and county to work together to add 50 encampment outreach workers, to divide those outreach workers into 10 teams, each team to have a county-funded, clinically trained mental health worker who can diagnose people on the street, and then to commit after the buildup, which God knows how long that will take, to commit to engaging aggressively in 20 tent encampments per month in the city of Sacramento. And the county committed itself, and I give them credit for this, to a legal standard of, quote, whatever it takes to not only diagnose, but to help navigate the individuals off the street who meet the minimum qualifications. And by the way, I have a bias, and I could be wrong, maybe based on data, maybe not based on data. If you're out on the streets for a long period of time, you're living with serious mental illness and or substance abuse. Period, end of story. That's not true, by the way, of people who are transitorily homeless, who are out there for short periods of time. You're out there for a long time, just as Dr. Amy said, you got to stay up at night, right? The legally binding partnership agreement requires the county to add as many wraparound service slots under the Mental Health Services Act, my legislation, Proposition 63, as are necessary to care for the numbers of people on the streets. And so we're trying to build up these teams. And so is this a problem of money, or is it a problem of replicating that kind of systems change and that kind of requirement across the board? The answer is not so easy, because we are now meeting and working very well together. Your supervisor, by the way, Rich Desmond, is terrific. We have decided, I can't give away everything here, that we're going to focus on one major corridor at a time, and prove concept. Clean it up, but do so in a human-centered way and actually help the people. We have 3 outreach teams. We're ready to go. Guess what? I don't have beds. We don't have beds. We don't know where we would navigate people to. Why don't we have more beds? Part of it is siting, but part of it is money. We need the resources to be able to borrow or buy and or take a major public facility and to be able to house hundreds of people if we're going to focus on X corridor and show the people of Sacramento that we can make a visible and tangible difference. So it's systems change and systems reform, I think centered on a mandatory obligation to act, combined with more resources. Either you believe it is a housing problem or a mental health problem. This one drives me crazy, because it's both. You know, you cannot treat the underlying mental health condition of somebody living under a riverbank or on the riverbank or under the freeway. Impossible. They're never going to get better. No, there's been a cold winter. It's the combination. We know whatever it takes, what it means. It means assertive, compassionate outreach, trust building. It means case management so that the individual has someone who can help navigate them, especially through the early stages of their recovery. It is temporary shelter, and by the way, not just congregate shelter. We're using a lot more motel rooms now, long-term leases of motel rooms. It requires the services, and it requires long-term housing. That individual will never recover unless they have stable housing. So those who say it's just a housing problem, well, you're also not going to successfully house somebody if they are not getting the help that they need. But you're not going to treat somebody with mental illness unless you house them. And the political dichotomy and duality, as I call it, is hindering progress. Either you're for strengthening conservatorship or you're not. So here's where I stand from the left side of the political spectrum, at least by reputation, long-term reputation. And I agree with the doctor's basic premise that voluntary services are the coin of the realm, and that if you build the trust with somebody over time, that 67% of the people, maybe higher, will actually agree to the services. We didn't talk about the other 33% and some of the people who, may be the sickest of the sick and plaguing, frankly, our business corridors and our neighborhoods. And this is what I've been talking to the governor, to the legislature about, and, I'm kind of the man coming down from Mars because I haven't quite gotten the traction yet. Step back for a minute. Why don't we say that we are going to combine rights and responsibilities? That's a powerful notion, rights and responsibilities, that everyone has a right to treatment, just like in the DD system. Everyone has a right to housing and shelter. And yes, I'm sorry, this is where I part from some of my friends on the left. Everybody has a legal obligation to accept it if offered. If we're really serious about the public policy of the society and the state being that people do not live outdoors because people live 25 years less on average, and people die in the hundreds every year, in the thousands statewide every year, nobody should live outside. I voted for the bill back in the day that required motorcycle riders to wear helmets. And that was controversial, but I'm telling you, everything is about balancing rights and responsibilities. Why aren't we combining rights and responsibilities and saying that when it comes to homelessness, everyone has a legal right to housing, a legal right to shelter, a legal right to mental health and substance abuse care, and yes, they have to accept it. And then finally, politically, frustration is right and normal, and sometimes it can lead to political advances. But I got to tell you, when I started in this job, I had long hair with bangs, and it wasn't gray, and, yes, the whole thing. I know, I'm just kidding. But I am so worn by the corrosiveness of the debate. I really am, and I'm an optimistic guy, but I'm worn by it because everybody's right and everybody's wrong. is frustration is understandable, but frustration is no substitute for thought leadership here. So I don't say that I have all the answers, but if the idea of a city and county now getting together 6 years after I started, so should have been faster. 6 years after I started to say, we are going to bind ourselves legally to a set of roles and responsibilities and commit ourselves to engaging in a humane way in 20 encampments a month, and we're going to guarantee services to people, and yes, we're going to also use our involuntary treatment laws as necessary, whether it be Laura's Law or care courts or whatever it takes to make sure that people are safe as a last resort, then maybe that's a path forward by which we can begin to turn these issues on its head. Because look what we put human beings through, and look what we put our institutions through. Emergency rooms, the healthcare system. One of the reasons why healthcare is so expensive is because we do such a poor job of finding alternatives to expensive emergency room settings for people in distress. You know, at some level, at some level, we have to back up the moral call for change with the legal the legal backing for change. The governor's care court idea, in conclusion here, I think, even though it's controversial, I think it has the elements of what could be more profound change. Because when you really look at it, all of the attention was on the civil liberties issue and the conservatorship. And I think, though I agreed with the policy, I think that's unfortunate. Because there's another half to the care court bill. And you know what it is? If the counties do not follow the judge-ordered directive around caring for the person, just like under our partnership agreement, a county could be fined $1,000 a day. Now, you don't want to use that as a remedy, but it's the beginning of combining rights and responsibilities in a way that could dramatically reduce suffering. Happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Really give us great food for thought. Amy, you talked about the no wrong door idea, and it seemed to me that perhaps that could be extended into other areas. What is the current thinking about making services that homeless people with chronic mental illness and substance abuse need more accessible to them by addressing the bureaucracy that is daunting to all of us, but maybe particularly daunting to this particular population?
So when we talk about the no wrong door, I'm thinking mostly about my emergency department. And to think about, like, the people are there, and we have spent 20, 30 years trying to say, you do not belong in the emergency department. You should not be in the emergency department for your drug treatment, your mental health care, your high blood pressure. And I've tried for decades to say, go elsewhere, and it doesn't work. And so maybe we should rethink that. And what I should just do is do a better job and say, hey, thank you for coming. You need drug treatment, you need mental health care, and I should just provide it. And that we should bring the resources and teach the emergency department how to do a better job of meeting those needs now. And so one of the things that we've done at UC Davis and through Bridge is to teach emergency departments to provide addiction treatment. Someone walks in with an opioid use disorder, and we start them on medications for addiction treatment, primarily buprenorphine or Suboxone. And we do it on demand the moment they walk in, and then try to link them to outpatient treatment. So instead of saying, this is not the right place for you, to say, let's see if we can make this an opportunity to get you further along your road to recovery, and not pretend like people are going to go elsewhere, but rather do a better job when they arrive.
I mean, this may sound like an odd statement, but there is no stent for a psychiatric illness or drug abuse, really. And I'm not defending the system, but, you know, modern medicine and science and technology knows how to treat heart disease. We know how to do it. And yes, we know how to treat addiction and mental illness, but it's not as easy. And there are a lot of stops and starts, and people react very different to different forms of medication, and people have different histories. And so I do think it's important to acknowledge that these issues are even more complex, and that we have a lot of work to do on the research and brain science task if we're going to be able to create more uniformity and ready access to care. I think that is part of it. It's not all of it, but I think it's part of it.
I would say to some extent that is true, but not always. So
Right.
for particularly for opioid use disorder, for people who are using heroin or fentanyl, I have medications that completely work that I can start in one day in the emergency
meth,
department.
though.
Methamphetamines are a little bit. There's some medications that help with methamphetamines, and then contingency management works well. Could I start that in the ED, and are there some that are doing it? Yes. So it's kind of like, can I fix asthma in one ED visit? No. Can I keep you alive and get you to your next treatment and help you? Yes. Can I help you manage your diabetes? Yes. So if I stop thinking that just because you have a mental illness, there's nothing I can do and I cannot help, and therefore you need to go elsewhere, I think that is wrong. And we will never get to integrated, destigmatized care for mental illness and substance use unless I start addressing mental illness and substance use with the same urgency as other chronic illness, diabetes, hypertension, and asthma.
Saying the same thing. Yep,
Yeah.
mostly. Yes, 97%.
So just one more question from the floor here, and then we'll take it to the audience. Mayor Steinberg, this might be a bit of a naive question, but as a policy historian as well as a policymaker, what happened with Prop 63, given that the salience of this issue to the public in California and the fact that these funds have been around for so long but don't seem to have made much of a dent on the problem?
Well, so this is, in part a communication problem. I think Prop 63 has been a tremendous success. Throughout the counties of California, it is funding hundreds of thousands of coin of the realm, whatever it takes, wraparound services for people. And there have been studies that have demonstrated that. There have been all kinds of tremendous innovations. The money is being put to good use, but I do have an issue with Prop 63, and I think there is an opportunity now with the legislature and the governor to not take a sledgehammer to it, but maybe something a little stronger than a scalpel, which is this. What we need to do with Prop 63 is we need to give counties discretion, but we need to insist on specific outcomes. In other words, within those wraparound service models, they're not spending enough of it on unsheltered homelessness. They're spending a lot of it on people who are really fragile, and maybe if they didn't get that wraparound support, they would end up homeless. But I think we have to triage the money a little bit more and better, and at least fund some of the initiatives, whether it's care courts or our city-county partnership, whatever it takes, to actually put those resources to use on our streets. And I do think that if the legislature amended Prop 63, it might require going back to the ballot to say, county, you have discretion, but we expect outcomes around reduction in unsheltered homelessness. We expect reductions in emergency room usage and people getting, or something like that, not going through the revolving door. That would be an improvement, because the fact that you asked the question the way you did, which by the way is not an uncommon question, you say, well, what's happening? Prop 63 saved the mental health system. During the recession, when the underlying mental health funding was cut deeply, it was Prop 63 that kept the safety net alive, and it's advanced a number of very important innovations, but the money could be better focused.
Thank you. And so we'll go ahead and start to take questions.